Hi everybody, Rob here from Prior Studios, and welcome to this second of the C4D Essentials tutorials. Now in the first one we covered a few things from polygon modeling, and today I'm going to talk more about spline modeling and some of the tools we have available to us to help us work really quite quickly. And the first one is going to be, we're going to make like a selection of vases. I think is probably the best thing. So let's just take our spline tool. And I'm just going to use the standard pen. So there are a load, if you're new to Cinema 4D, there are a load of kind of preset parametric and primitive spline tools here, or spline objects, and a couple of tools which we'll talk about later on. For now, we probably don't need those. We're just going to stick with the pen. And we have various types of pen. We're going to stick with the Bezier, that's fine for what we need here. And all we're going to do is we're just going to make sure we've selected that, and we're just going to plot out a path which is going to be kind of the edge of our vase. So I'm going to start by hitting P. I'm going to turn on enable snap. I'm going to hit P again. I'm going to turn on work plane snap, which is referencing this grid in the background, and if I hit P once more, I'm going to choose grid point snap. So as I move around this grid, you can see that the point is snapping to it, and that means that I can make sure that my first point is going to be bang in the center. So I've just clicked once, and you can see in the coordinate manager down here everything is set to 0. Now I'm going to take my second point and I'm going to drag it out here, so I know this is going to be exactly where I want it on the grid. And you can see that this, if I do a third point here, you can see that this is quite linear. Now if I back up and decide I don't want that to be linear, if I click there and hold and drag, I will get a smooth version. Now I'm going to add a second point around here, and I'm going to drag again, and that lets me smooth out the kind of the interchange between those 2 points. Now if I come to halfway up this grid line as I drag and then let go, I know that this curve is going to be kind of doing exactly what I want. And I know that the curve will be a perfectly smooth curve from this point to this one. And I'm just going to add a couple more, and I'm going to drag out this one here. Now let's just hold down the Alt key and middle mouse button to move myself around. I'm going to drag one more here. I'm going to click once, not drag. I'm going to click once, not drag. Click once, not drag. And then I'm going to I'm going to back up. I'm going to back up to here. Okay. And at this point, I'm going to stop. So I'm going to hit spacebar just to drop that tool. And we're going to look a little bit more closely at what we've got here. So this first point here is just a standard kind of point. There are no handles there to worry about. This one, however, you can see does have handles. Now, this is because it's soft on one side. So this side here, even though we didn't drag, I dragged on the next point along. So that means that there's a handle here. Now, if I want to change the type of this, I can make it a linear hard interpolation. And you can see that's gone perfectly hard. And the handle here is the one that's giving the curve. And this works quite well for our case. But if we wanted to smooth that out and make this kind of a more gentle effect, we can come in and we could turn on soft interpolation. Now that does have the effect of smoothing out this first section of our spline. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. And if I go into one of the move, scale or rotate tools, I can actually hold down shift. Let's just make sure I've got it selected first. So I'm just going to go back to my live selection tool. I'm going to make sure that's selected there. And if I go into move, I can just grab this. I'm holding down shift, and I'm going to grab it until I reach one of these grid points, because then I know I've got a perfectly straight line. And you can see that's because my snapping is still on. Now if I'm using splines, I tend to keep that kind of workspace snapping turned on, and the grid option turned on as well. And I can very quickly come in and turn that off just by hitting the magnet there. And that you can see that the spot has disappeared and it's not snapping to the grid. But if I press it again, it'll come back on, enable snap, and now you can see it's all back to normal. Right, so what else can we do with this? So we have a profile here, and if I zoom out and just fit this, I can do a few things. I can adjust these like I did before, just by coming in, grabbing the handles and adapting that shape to fit my needs. I can delete points, so if I don't want that one there, I can just select it, hit backspace, and it's gone. I actually quite like that shape. What you can also do is you can right click in here and you can do a few different things. So if I want to give this thickness, I can create an outline. If I click and drag, you can see that I now have some thickness to this shape, which I think is actually going to be quite useful for this. So I'm going to just drop that tool by hitting the spacebar, and I like this thickness, but what I'm not too keen on is this kind of sharp edge. So before I go into adapting that sharp edge, and I'm not going to do that using the soft interpolation button there, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to go into the lathe, and holding down Alt means that the spline is a child of the lathe. Now if I go into my perspective view and just hit H so I can see everything, we've got this, which actually, now we're seeing it in the perspective view, is maybe a little bit on the tubby side, and I'm not so sure I like it. I also want to see the mesh underneath, so I'm just going to hit display, grid shading lines, and we can see what we've got. Now back to those 2 points. If I just select them in my perspective view and zoom in a touch, right click, and I'm going to go down to Chamfer. Now Chamfer gives me the option to just type in a number, or I can do it real time just by clicking and dragging to the right, and you can see that this is all being rounded off really quite nicely. Just going to zoom in so you can see that. I've kept a little bit of a flat front there, but that is a particularly good tool if you're going in and adapting sharp corners. And if I just go back into that tool again, I'll just undo what I did. I can show you some of the other options. So let's make sure we're back on that tool. So we're going to the chamfer tool. Now if I want to make these more of a bevel, I can do that by clicking the flat button there, and this will just give me a flat bevel, which is also very useful. Now I prefer this to be rounded off, and right, so I'm about happy with that. And what I don't like now is the fact that this is still quite jagged, and that's down to the lathe option itself. So I can come down here and I can change subdivisions. So the subdivision here is kind of around the y-axis. So if I increase that to say 48, you'll see that we get more divisions and it's much smoother. The isopalm subdivision, you'll see, doesn't really do too much at this point. Let's just go to display isopalms. So this is our kind of control mesh. Now if I increase it, you'll see, just wait for this to catch up, that we're getting a little bit more definition in certain places. You probably will find that you don't play around with that too much, so I'm just going to leave that at 4. Now, the reason I used snapping when I first started this is quite important, and I will show you what happens if a point isn't perfectly in the middle of your scene. You'll get a hole, or you'll get a nasty mesh. You'll get a kind of a strange thing going on down the bottom. Now you don't have to turn snapping on if you don't like, because you can go back in and you can select that central point and you can type in on the X and the Z axis, you can just type in 0 and that will weld itself back together again. Okay, so this is kind of a good introduction to doing a lathe, which is really good for an object like a bottle or a vase, or a handle to something which has the same profile all the way around. Now if you wanted to do something slightly different, we can do that. Now let's just, while I'm here, I'm just going to tidy this up just a little bit, because I'm not overly fond of this overall shape. I might want to just kind of adapt that slightly. So I'm going to go into a quad view. Actually I'm going to go back into my side view. I'm going to take all of my points except those ones. I'm going to push them in, and I think that's probably going to look a little bit better, slightly less dumpy. And I might even take those 2 points there, and because they're soft interpolation, that's going to look a little bit nicer, and they'll keep their kind of smoothness. So I'm also going to push in the top just a touch. Okay, so this is more kind of like gourd shaped vase. Right, so let's just call that first one vase 1. And I'm just going to move the object. Let's go to object mode. I'm just going to move it across just a touch to the side, and I'm going to take let's take a circle, we'll take a star, we'll take another circle, and let's take a rectangle. So I have, let's move these to the bottom as well. So I'm just going to select all of those objects and just drag them underneath. And what I want to do here is I want to start with a circle at the bottom. I'm going to move up to a star, which will be about there. But the first circle, let's just decrease the size of that. So the splines often have a number of attributes that you can change here. So I'm going to change this one down to, say, 60 centimeters, which will make that circle much smaller. Then we go up to the star. And the star, I'm just going to leave default settings, although I will probably come in and change the inner radius. So the inner radius is where these kind of more inward pointing, actually let's just do it now, parts of the thing are. So we've got slightly more subtle shape. I'm going to take this third circle, and this time I'm just going to scale it down in my view to about there. Then I'm going to take my rectangle, and I'm also going to decrease the size of that slightly and lift it up. So this is a technique called lofting, and this allows you to use different profiles to make a form which will be similar to this vase we've got here, but with these kind of variations that you couldn't do unless you were using this technique. So let's come in and add a loft, and we'll add all of these to that loft object. And now you can see that we transition, this vase is transitioning all the way through from that bottom circle right the way through this star shape into the circle and the square. So what's really good about this is that you can carry on kind of changing these. So we've got a really nice bit of twist at the top of this, and we can increase that twist if we really wanted to. So I could bring that round. I could maybe take the rectangle and the uppermost of those circles, and I could just give them a twist just to really kind of exaggerate that. Now you can see that we have something which isn't quite vase shaped here, and that's because we have a cap on the top here. Now certain objects in Cinema 4D will give you these caps. Let's go into the cap section here, and the start, which is the bottom, has a cap, which we want because we'd want it to be a vase that actually, you know, can hold water. And the end, which will be the final part, and this depends on the order you've got them running down here. So this may actually be reversed, because if we look at the rectangles at the top, let's just say none, and we can see that is actually the wrong way around. So now you can either swap this cap to none and this one to cap, or you could reverse the order of those, but you're probably better off swapping these around. So just change these to none and cap, and there we go, we have a vase shape. Now at this point you might want to give this some thickness. So how do you do that when you're looking at a spline based object, not a polygon one, or you know, this where you can give it an outline, because you can't really outline these quite as easily, or certainly not as fast. Well, what you can do is you can skip all this, because let's just, for example, take this rectangle. Let's just go into, we'd have to make it editable for a start, so that's one downfall. I'd have to then right click and go create outline, and then, oh well, that hasn't worked, it's not done anything. So let's back up and look at a different way of doing this. So I have all of these. If I hit Shift and C, and by the way, this brings up any command in Cinema 4D, and I just type in cloth surface, double click that, I now have a cloth surface in my scene. If I put that loft inside it as a child, you can see the display changes, but we've still not really got any thickness. But what we can do if we select that cloth surface is we can type in a thickness here. So let's just say a thickness of 1, or to really just kind of exaggerate it, I'll just say 5 for now, just so you can see what I'm doing. And now we have a thickness to what is actually quite a complex and intricate shape, which we've made in just a few minutes, probably less than a minute if I wasn't explaining as I go along. And that looks pretty cool. Now, this can be made editable, so you could make it into a polygon object just by hitting C. And there you go. Now this will have created a few children. So the cap, which will be that bottom circle, and then the polygons for the actual loft itself. So any of these objects can be made into polygons, but I would suggest leaving them parametric like this, because now we've got the beauty of this quite complex shape, but we've still got the ability to come in and maybe, if we want to take that star and change certain aspects of it, if we want to change the outer radius, we can do that. If we want to give that some twist as well, we can. So we can offset one side of the point compared to the other, which is also, something that would take forever to model in any other way. So we have two really quite beautiful shapes there, made very, very simply, which is pretty much the only way of doing either of these shapes in the time that it's taken us to do them. But what about actually having something in there? So let's just make a few kind of sticks like you see, and I'm just going to take this cloth surface, which we'll call vase 2, and I'm just going to reduce the overall size of it and just shrink it down to about there. And I'm going to go back into this view. It doesn't really matter which view I use for this. I'm going to take my pen and I'm just going to draw out a few. Why isn't this catching up? So my viewport's not catching up, so bear with me. Right, a few points here. Just going to delete that and start again. I think for some reason my viewport was playing up. I imagine it's probably because of my screen capture software running at the same time. Okay, let's try this again. So I'm going to take my pen in Bezier mode. I'm just going to start about here and just draw a few lines out. So I'm going to now take a circle, which is way too big, but let's do this in perspective view so you can see what happens. And we're going to take a third kind of a spline object. So let's click on the subdivision surface and we will use a sweep. So a sweep takes a path and a profile. So again, the order is quite important. Let's put the circle first. So you always sweep object A along object B. So put that under there. Now obviously that circle was way too big. So let's turn this down to say 2, which is probably about right. But when you see these kind of arty vases in showrooms and things, they're never going to be the same thickness all the way along because they're kind of natural. They're just twigs that have been ripped off a tree. So what you can do is you can go into this sweep object and you can click on the object here, and if you open up the details, you can actually draw the scale in. So if you want it to be thicker at one end than the other, you can do that. And if you watch in the viewport as I do this, you can see what's happening. You can just control click in the scene here and add extra bits. So if you want to really kind of define certain areas as being kind of thicker or lumpier, you can do that really very, very easily. So I'm just going to have a bit of a bulbous tip there like this. And again, you can change the arms, which is the interpolation. So you've got these handles, you can change them as well. You hold down shift and you can just grab them, and you can have one longer than the other, like so. And this now gives us what is actually quite a nice shape. So what I meant when I talked about the not just the direction and the order, but you also have a plane. So if you're adding a spline object to a scene, you might want to just check. If you get an odd behavior, just check the plane here. So where it says XY, if that was in ZY, then it wouldn't work. And if it was in XZ, then it might look like it's working now, but I can guarantee if I zoom in, that's actually flat. So just bear that in mind when you're working on your splines. And this has been kind of 3 ways of looking at various things. Now there's one more you can use. I'm going to use the really simple example for this. So I'm going to take just a standard, let's take a circle, and I'm going to go back into my subdivisions, add an extrude, and if I make that circle a child of the extrude, sorry, and just change it so it's on the XZ, I'm going to go into the extrude, and what we're looking for here is the movement. So at the moment this is in the Z axis because it always goes X, Y, Z. So I'm going to turn that down to 0, and I'm going to say I want this vase to be 30 centimeters tall, maybe 35. So I'm going to do that in the axis there, and if I just move this to the side, you can see I now have this, which looks like it's a solid, very short column. I might increase this. Let's make this 90. I model these a little bit big. If I was going to go in and render these, which I will at some point, I would definitely decrease the size so they're a more real world size. Let's take that circle and just make it about maybe 30 centimeters across, maybe a bit bigger. I'm going for proportion here in my viewport. I'm going to actually make that 100, and then I'll reduce the size of all of them when I render. Okay, just a quick note on that. While you're modeling, if you're modeling just a prop on its own like this, then it doesn't matter too much. But if you're going to put it into a scene or save it for use elsewhere or for other people, then please make sure that they're real world sizes. Working to scale will give you much better results, as well as making it easier to reuse everything and share. Okay, so the extrude has a similar kind of a cap system as we were talking about earlier. So let's turn off the end cap. So we've got a hollow top, but it's still got a base. And we can do similar thing again. We could use a cloth nib, or we could for this, because this is such a simple example, we could make that editable. So let's make that extrude editable, and we should have one child here, which is the cap. Now I'm going to select both of those, right click, connect objects, and delete, and that still lets me select that bottom polygon if I want to, just by double clicking the selection tag here. But now I've got these, I can go in, and this is, again, I'm straying from the spline topic of the day, and I'm just going to select all, and I can hit D for extrude, or I could just hold down Control and just drag to the right. And you can see that this is actually, if I drag inwards, it's more clear. You can see it's giving a kind of a lip across the top, but it's not actually giving me any thickness. And that's because you need to turn on create caps here. And you'll also find, and that's fixed the thickness issue, you'll also find that there's a bit of a trouble spot around this bottom edge. And that's because this is 90 degrees, because this is kind of the side of this is perpendicular. So we need a maximum angle of greater than 90 degrees. Let's just type in 91, or maybe even more. Why is that not caught up? That's interesting. I must have missed an extrude somewhere. All right. Okay, so this is why I like to record my videos without any editing, because I've now stumbled across a problem which I don't quite understand why it's there. So I think the first thing to do is just optimize the mesh, because maybe something's not quite joined up to itself. And let's just do that again. So just going to add some thickness. Okay, so the base hadn't welded itself. When I did the connect and delete, the points on here weren't actually connected to the points on the other section, even though they look like it. So now I've actually got some thickness to this object as well, which is great. So I now have 3 vases, all based on spline either profiles or or various profiles and paths. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll probably add a few more of these twigs in here, and I'll make a little render of this, like I did with the previous chair. Let's just call this Vase 3, I think, Vase 3, and I'll hope this has been of some interest. Please let me know what topics you'd like next. Thanks again to all of my Patreon supporters. If you haven't seen it, follow the links below, and every penny helps, and I'd really love to make these a properly produced weekly video for you all. So thanks again, and yeah, please get in touch and let me know what you've done or what questions you have.